Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim. Are you above average? Let's talk about that. Today, I want to talk about whether or not you think you are above average at something. Like, are you good at really, really good at this thing? Better than most other people. So, let's set aside imposter syndrome. I have a whole video on that. I'm not talking about those times where you feel like, oh no, someone's got to find out that I'm terrible and fire me. A lot of people I've worked with and a lot of people I read on forums think they're an above average game developer. I mean, they seriously think, compared to all other game developers out there, I'm way better. It's interesting because I've worked with a lot of game developers, and the politest thing I can say is that isn't true. The nicest thing I can say, and I'll talk about it, is I've met people who are really good at some things and really bad at other things. And they don't like to even think about those things they're bad at. And because they don't think about it, they think, well, I'm average everywhere, but I'm really above average at this. There's a really common statistic that gets thrown around about American drivers. Depending on what study you see, it's somewhere between 80 and 90% of United States automobile drivers think that they're above average. The only way that can be true is if all those people are really good at driving, and then there's like 10-15% of people driving who are so awful, so down here that everybody else can be up here and they can drag them down to average. And let me just tell you, that is not the case. It is not the case. Most people are average drivers. That's what average is. Well, actually, that's what median is. But you know what I'm talking about. I think the same is true about employees. But really, what we need to do is we need to break it down into individual tasks. Like maybe some people are really good at obeying street signs, but they're not good at reacting to sudden changes in driving conditions. They're not good at driving in snow. They're not good at parallel parking. Are they still a good driver? I have a whole video about talking about Troika having a flat hierarchy. And I'll sum it up here. When Troika started in 1998, we hired everyone and we paid everyone the same salary, regardless of where they were in the hierarchy, from the owners down to the newly hired people, and regardless of what they were, whether they're an artist, a programmer, a designer. Wow, that was a huge, huge mistake. I go into way more detail in the video, so watch the video, link below if you want to know. But the bottom line was, not everybody we hired contributed the same to the game. For example, let's just take programming, which I was doing a lot of. Not all of the programmers wrote code that was as efficient or as low in bugs, or wrote it as quickly, or could write a variety of code. In other words, they could write better code in more areas than just one type. So they were a good non-specific. They were a good generalist programmer. That was not true for all of them. Same thing happened with art. Same thing happened with design. We couldn't continue to pay everybody the same amount because it was painfully clear that was unfair to the people who were contributing way more than average. In some sense, too, it's unfair to the people who are contributing a lot less than average. But here's the thing. Nobody likes being told that they're not as good as somebody else. Nobody. That is a tough meeting to have. Also, even if you have evidence, even if you have irrefutable, objective evidence, they do not like it. Now, I've talked on this channel about what I've come to realize I'm bad at. Just to remind you, business development and character writing, especially dialogue writing, are the two that are top of my list. Despite that, people keep asking me for advice on those two things, and so whenever I do, I put a big caveat in front of it. But what I have to ask you is, are you honest with yourself about your strengths and weaknesses? because in my experience, most people are not. If you think you're great at everything, you're not. You're not. Hate to rip that Band-Aid off, you're not. If you try to back up and go, well, I'm a good generalist. Well, generalists aren't great at everything. They're just good at a lot of things. And there are a few things they're not good at. But because they're generalists, you can usually find a specialist who's way better at something that they can do. And sometimes, depending on what kind of game you're making, you do need a specialist. You're making a multiplayer game, you need a network specialist. You're making, especially if you're making an MMO where there's going to be thousands of people connected, not just 5. So even falling back and saying you're a generalist is not a way of saying, well, I'm above average. It's saying you're really good at a lot of things and then probably bad at a few other things. This, by the way, I think is a source of, there are people I've worked with in the past who don't like working with me. Because guess what? I had to explain to them in excruciating detail why their code or their design or whatever it is they did wasn't as good as they thought it was. And guess what? That's just something a manager, if you're ever in a manager position, you're going to have to do that. You're going to end up with somebody who, they may not be a bad employee, but there may be something that they're bad at. And guess who has to explain it to them? You. You can't get around this. You can't kick the can upstairs. You can't, eventually you're going to be in a position where you have people who report to you. And not all of them are going to be great. And most of them aren't going to be great at everything. So you're going to have one of those uncomfortable meetings where you're like, yeah, you're not getting your stuff done fast enough, or the stuff you're turning in is really bad, or the stuff you're turning in isn't nearly as good as what your peers are doing, and we need to talk about it. So you also may want to keep in mind that this is probably the source of some, not all, but some negative company reviews that you read are probably from employees who weren't very good at their job. And rather than accept that, they just like, I'm going to yell at the company when I get laid off or fired. I'm sure if you ever look at Yelp, I'm sure you can tell that some of those Yelp reviews are really being left by problem customers. They're just ridiculous in what they expected. They walk into a little mom and pop restaurant and they're like, I need all vegan, all gluten-free, and vegan, and I don't even know what vegan means because I want cheese. And then they leave a bad review. So this happens with company reviews as well. Many of them are valid. Some of them aren't. How do you filter those? I don't know. I wish I could have figured out how to filter stuff early on. One idea would be you have to prove you worked at a company in order to post, but most people don't want their actual names attached for retaliation. I doubt people would want their annual reviews attached, even if they were anonymized. So I don't know how you can filter a company review to get rid of the reviews by people who are just bad employees. And let me just state that some of the negativity that companies get is truly and 100% deserved. Just remember, it's one side. You're getting one side at those places. Just like my videos, and some of you have mentioned, are one side. They're my side. So what is my recommendation? What's my TLDW? Too late. You watched. Just come to some sort of understanding and comfort that you are going to be average at some things, really good at other things, and bad at a few other things. This is just the way of the world. It's almost everybody who's out there. Yeah, there's a few people who are great at everything and a few people who are bad at everything, and you're probably not one of them. The thing here is you need to be honest. At the very minimum, be honest with yourself. I guarantee you that not just your job life, but your life in general will be a lot easier if you acknowledge, these are things I'm not good at. I shouldn't do this. Whether it's, me paying someone to do plumbing in my house because I'm not good at that, to you just deciding this isn't a good job for me, it's not a good fit because I'm just not good at this. This is something that only you can figure out for yourself. People will tell you things. Sometimes what they're telling you is wrong, But if enough people tell you you're not good at something, maybe you're not good at it. Try to get better. But there are things I've learned that I just can't get better at. They're not a skill set that I can improve, or at least improve after decades of trying. So that's pretty much what I'm saying here. You can be above average at some things. You're probably going to be below average at others. Figure that out. Your life will be a lot easier once you understand yourself.